He was not forged in battle, nor born beneath a banner of glory. He entered the world quietly, a boy with thoughtful eyes, raised among books, discipline, and the fragile peace of a nation that had always known conflict but stubbornly believed in hope. Poland was his home, proud, scarred, and determined to live free. Jan Karski grew up walking streets where church bells mingled with laughter, where students debated in cafes and dreams felt possible. He believed in diplomacy, in truth, in reason. His ambitions were not heroic in the way legends are born. He wanted to serve through words, not weapons, through treaties, not trenches. In his youth, he polished shoes, studied history and politics, practiced manners and languages. He imagined embassies and formal banquets, not rail cars packed with suffering or streets echoing with hunger and silence. Fate, however, cares nothing for dreams. In September 1939, the morning sky over Poland did not open with sunlight, it split open with fire. German bombers descended, and the first explosions did more than shatter buildings. They shattered innocence. Streets filled with smoke, children with fear, soldiers with shock. Jan, freshly commissioned, marched not with pride but necessity, defending a homeland collapsing under steel and invasion. The German army pressed from the west. The Soviets cut in from the east. Poland, defiant but outnumbered, fell. Yet surrender lived only in maps, not hearts. And Jan, like his nation, did not break. Captured by Soviet forces, he marched as a prisoner, boots sinking in mud that swallowed hope with each step. Men beside him disappeared each day, pulled aside, sent to camps, erased from life without ceremony. Jan survived not by strength, but by miracle. Released in a prisoner exchange, a life spared not by destiny's kindness, but its cruel randomness. He returned to Poland and found it caged by occupation. German uniforms patrolled streets once filled with music. Fear lived in the air like winter frost. But courage, buried deep, still breathed. Jan did not flee. He stepped instead into the shadows, into Poland's underground resistance, a nation living under the soil, whispering, planning, defying. They needed couriers, messengers who could move through borders without leaving footprints, who carried secrets not on paper but in memory. Every mission was a gamble against torture and death. Jan volunteered not because he felt brave, but because duty called louder than fear. That is courage, not confidence, but commitment. He learned the silent art of survival. A glance too long could betray him. A pause at a checkpoint could kill. He memorized maps, names, safe houses, passwords. He crossed mountains in snow, forests in darkness, cities disguised as laborers, farmers, travelers. He rode trains where the air was thick with suspicion, every uniform a threat, every moment borrowed. He once said he felt fear every day, and yet he walked into danger again and again. Heroes are not fearless. They simply refuse to bow to fear. By late 1942, his missions had already crossed countries, carrying intelligence the free world desperately needed. But then a summons arrived, urgent, heavy, whispered through resistance channels. He returned to Warsaw not to rest, but to bear witness to a truth the world refused to believe. Inside meetings held by candlelight, resistance leaders told him stories too monstrous to accept. The Jewish district was not merely oppressed, it was dying. Starvation by design, disease encouraged to spread, deportations whispered to end in places no one dared describe aloud. It sounded impossible. Evil that large always does, until someone sees it. They needed a witness the world might hear, and they chose him. Not because he asked, but because he could not refuse. Through a secret passage, in borrowed clothing, Jan entered the Warsaw Ghetto. The world inside was not a district, it was a wound carved into a city. Streets lined with faces far too thin to belong to the living. Children sitting on curbs with hollow eyes, too tired to cry. Mothers searching garbage for crumbs smaller than prayer. Men leaning against broken walls, whispering benedictions for strength, not survival. Clothes hung on bones. Silence weighed heavier than the cold. It was humanity, starved, suffocated, stripped of dignity, but not spirit. He saw a boy barefoot in winter, clutching a sliver of bread like it was treasure, saving it for someone who would never return. A girl stared at him, not with hope, but confusion. How could someone still wear clean clothes in a place built from suffering? Some children did not look at all, their faces empty, eyes glazed, life slowly retreating. Babies swaddled in rags did not cry. They had already learned the cost of noise. He walked streets where people died quietly because grief had become too common to notice. The air carried the scent of hunger and despair, yet through it moved threads of resilience, hands holding hands, voices reciting prayers, small acts of kindness and a world designed to erase them. Then he was taken deeper, beneath the city, through tunnels no map marked. He emerged in a place worse than the ghetto, a holding yard, a waiting room for death, where families stood pressed together, clutching one another, knowing their destination but clinging to hope anyway, because hope dies last. German guards paced near freight trains. Smoke drifted from distant chimneys. Children tried to hide in their mother's skirts. Old men kissed mezuzahs one final time. The truth stabbed sharper than any knife. This was not relocation, nor imprisonment. It was extermination, systematic and merciless. Jan left that place with trembling bones and a burden greater than any courier had carried. Not a secret, but a scream the world needed to hear. He returned to underground headquarters, pale, shaken, voice quivering, not from fear, but from sorrow so vast it hollowed him. He whispered only, "I have seen what I did not believe possible." They handed him reports, coded, fragile, desperate letters to humanity, and told him to bring the truth to those with power. He memorized names, numbers, accounts of horror. His mind became a vault, his soul a battlefield. Before he left, he stood near the sealed ghetto walls one last time. Through a crack he saw movement, not violence, but life stubbornly clinging to existence. A child with two large eyes looked at him as though sensing something in him, witness, messenger, maybe salvation. Jan whispered without voice, only breath, "I will tell them, I swear, I will tell them." That silent promise became his compass. He set off again, through borders and danger, enemy patrols and frozen nights. Each checkpoint was death waiting with a mask on. Each mile carried the weight of thousands of souls. He did not know if he would live long enough to speak. He did not know if anyone would listen if he did. But still he walked. Still he carried the truth, because silence, he knew, was death, and speaking, even if unheard, was duty to the suffering who could no longer speak for themselves. He moved not like a spy, but like a pilgrim of truth, carrying a message bigger than war itself. A man traveling not toward safety, but toward history, driven by the belief that if the world only knew, it would act. He never imagined the world might hear and remain silent.
He did not carry documents alone. He carried souls. And in the quiet spaces between heartbeats, in the trembling of train tracks, in the rustle of winter wind, he carried one question that weighed heavier than any secret. If the world sees this darkness, will it bring light or turn away? The answer awaited him on the other side of danger. But for now he walked, alone with truth, into a future he did not yet know would break his heart more deeply than the horrors he had already witnessed. Winter settled over Warsaw like a cruel whisper, cold enough to freeze breath into tiny ghosts in the air. Snow fell silently, covering broken bricks and shattered glass, as if trying to hide the wounds the city carried. For most children in the ghetto, winter meant hunger tightening its grip and sickness creeping in through thin walls. But for Daniel, winter meant something else: danger wrapped in shadows and frost. The tunnel space behind the loose bricks shrank in the cold, and slipping in and out scraped his ribs raw. His hands bled from the stone. His shoes, worn thin, soaked through with snow until he could no longer feel his toes. Still, he continued. Fear gnawed at him constantly, but hope, stubborn and shining, pushed him forward. He moved carefully through alleys, always keeping to the edges, always watching the guards. They learned their patterns, how one always whistled a low tune before turning the corner, how another tapped his boots twice before lighting the cigarette. These details became lifelines. Every heartbeat felt like it could give him away, every breath like it carried a secret too big for the air around him. Yet, each time he saw a child, small, trembling, alone, he knew hesitation meant death. So he swallowed his fear and approached quietly, offering warmth where the world offered none. One night he found a boy and girl huddled under a broken cart. They looked like siblings, eyes hollow, faces thin, clothes barely clinging to them. Snowflakes rested on their hair like tiny stars. Daniel knelt beside them slowly, whispering gently, as though speaking to wild birds ready to fly away. The girl clutched a doll made from scraps of cloth, its stitched face smeared with dirt, but loved fiercely. Daniel offered a crust of bread, and the boy stared at it as though it were gold. Hunger made eyes desperate. Trust made hearts heavy. But Daniel's voice was soft, steady, older than his years. The children followed, quietly, trembling, toward the hidden gap in the wall. As he prepared them, he heard boots crunch in the snow. A German voice barked orders in the distance, closer than he'd ever heard before. Panic surged like ice water through his veins. The boy whimpered. The girl squeezed her doll. Daniel forced his breath to slow. Panic killed faster than bullets. He whispered, "Quiet, slow, breathe," even though his own chest felt like it might explode. They crawled one by one, snow creeping against their coats. Daniel pushed gently, urging them through. When the girl slipped, he caught her before she hit the bricks, muffling her gasp with his sleeve. She looked at him, eyes huge with fear, and he nodded, as if to say, "I will not let the darkness take you." When the children vanished through the gap, Daniel nearly collapsed from relief. Then he ran, not because he feared being caught, but because he didn't want them to look back and see him trembling. Courage sometimes meant pretending you weren't afraid so others could believe in safety. That night, he returned home soaked, shivering, and shaking. His mother held his face, searching his eyes, sensing the storm inside him. He didn't speak of what he did. Not yet. Silence was protection. Secrets were survival. But she brushed his cheek gently, and without knowing why, tears slipped from his eyes. Some battles were too heavy for a child's heart. The ghetto changed with each passing day. Rumors floated like smoke. Deportations increasing, trains leaving the station full but returning empty. People whispered the name of a place, Treblinka, though no one wanted to believe what it meant. Darkness grew thicker, and still Daniel moved through shadows, helping one child at a time. Sometimes the escapes went smoothly. Sometimes they didn't. There were nights when footsteps echoed too near, when he had to lie flat in garbage piles, holding his breath as soldiers walked past, boots inches from his face. There were moments where he almost turned back, fear clawing at his heart. But then he remembered hunger in small eyes, remembered smiles that didn't belong in war, remembered that even a child deserved light. One evening, as he crossed a courtyard littered with cold ash, he heard faint crying, soft, almost swallowed by the wind. Following the sound, he found a toddler sitting alone, clutching nothing but a button in a tiny fist. The child's cheeks were streaked with tears, his breath short and frightened. Daniel hesitated, not because he didn't want to help, but because rescuing a baby was nearly impossible. Too loud, too fragile, too easily frightened. But leaving him, that was not a choice. Daniel wrapped the child in his scarf, holding him close, whispering lullabies his mother used to hum. The baby's cries softened, then faded into tiny shivers. Carrying him through the streets was a gamble with fate. Twice, Daniel pressed himself into doorways as soldiers marched past. Once, he ducked behind crates, heart pounding so violently he feared it would echo in the night. By the time he reached the hidden gap, his arms ached and his legs felt numb. The baby whined softly and Daniel rocked him, humming a tune with trembling lips. When he finally passed the child through to waiting arms on the other side, the catch in his breath was sharper than any pain. Some victories came wrapped in fear, but they still counted. Word began to spread in whispers. They didn't know his name, they only knew there was a boy, small and brave, saving stars from the darkness. Daniel never heard the whispers himself, but he noticed how sometimes an old woman would touch his hand with a strange softness, or how a tired man would nod with quiet respect. A few children who had not yet escaped would look at him with eyes full of wonder, like they sensed something in him, some invisible shield he carried against despair. If only they knew how often he felt terrified, how often he doubted himself, how often he lay awake fighting thoughts that felt too heavy for a child. But maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear. Maybe courage was walking anyway, shaking but determined, choosing light when darkness pressed hardest. Still, fear wasn't the only thing following him. Danger grew with each passing week. Suspicion crept through the ghetto. There were rumors of informers, people so desperate for survival, they traded secrets for bread. One afternoon, footsteps trailed Daniel longer than usual. A man with sharp eyes watched from a distance. Daniel turned suddenly, and the man vanished between buildings. Paranoia wasn't paranoia in war. It was instinct, sharpened by necessity. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. Shadows felt thicker. Danger felt closer. Yet in the morning, as frost kissed the windows, he still rose, still stepped into cold streets, still searched for those he could save. But fate had its own plans. On a gray evening heavy with snow clouds, he heard voices arguing near a corner. A boy, his age, desperate, gaunt, threatened to turn someone in unless he got food. Hunger bends even good souls. Daniel froze. The boy turned and saw him. Their eyes locked, one pair filled with guilt and hunger, the other filled with fear and determination. For a moment, time paused. Then the boy looked away, Daniel exhaled slowly. The world was not just cruel. It was complicated. Every person carried battles unseen. Yet even as danger grew sharper, Daniel's resolve did too. He knew what he was risking. He knew one mistake could end everything. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw faces, thin, innocent, trembling, and he knew his purpose. He was only a child, but war did not care about age. If darkness demanded grown men, then light demanded brave hearts wherever they existed. And so, he continued. Night after night, freezing hands, pounding heart, quiet footsteps, saving stars one by one. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if he would survive. But he knew this: even a small flame can defy the night. And Daniel, without meaning to, had become a flame in a world trying desperately to go dark.
The war did not slow. It tightened its grip like a fist around a fragile heartbeat. Each week brought new rules, new fears, new shadows stretching across the ghetto streets. Daniel moved through them like a thread of light, thin, trembling, but unbroken. He had grown quieter, older in his eyes. Childhood was not lost in a single moment, but stolen in pieces. Every time he smuggled a child out, every time he held his breath as soldiers passed, every time he saw a family torn apart, hope came with a price, and he paid it in innocence. One afternoon, snow fell in lazy drifts, soft and indifferent to human sorrow. The ghetto looked almost peaceful under its blanket of white, as if winter tried to pretend the world was kind. But hunger carved deeper lines into faces, and whispers of deportation thickened like smoke no wind could clear. Daniel stood in a doorway, watching children, thin as twigs, scrape frost from railings into their mouths, desperate for any taste of cold relief. His heart ached so sharply he pressed a hand to his chest. He wanted to save them all. He knew he could not, and yet he tried, one soul at a time, as if he could stitch the world back together with his bare hands. That day he approached a family, a mother and two small boys, hiding behind the rubble of a crumbled wall. The mother's eyes were hollow but steady. Exhaustion had carved ridges under them like wounds. When Daniel whispered his purpose, her shoulders trembled. She looked at her children, then at him, a boy, too thin, too young, offering the only thing she had left to believe in. Her hands shook as she touched her son's cheeks. Love makes impossible choices. With a voice cracked by grief, she nodded. Daniel inhaled deeply, steadying himself. But before he could lead them away, the younger boy, barely 5, clung to his mother's skirt, refusing to leave. His tears fell silently, as if even crying feared punishment. Daniel lowered himself to eye level, speaking softly, promising they would see their mother again someday, promising safety. The boy looked at him, not trusting him, not doubting him, simply lost between fear and innocence. Finally, the mother knelt, holding her sons tight, whispering something only they could hear. When they stood, they followed. The mother stayed behind, wiping her face, trying to appear strong as soldiers marched in the far street. Daniel did not look back. Looking back hurt worse than cold, worse than hunger. He held the boys' hands tightly, guiding them toward the hidden exit, praying his grip would not fail them, praying the world would not. That night, Daniel sat by the dim light of a broken window, staring at his fingers. They shook without his permission, as though fear lived inside his bones now. His mother watched him from across the room, silent, worried. She could not stop him. This mission had become bigger than fear, bigger than family, bigger than war. She simply prayed quietly each night, hands trembling over the small piece of bread she saved for him. Love in wartime was not gentle. It was desperate, fierce, unspoken. It was watching your child walk toward danger and having no choice but to let him. Days blurred. Snow melted. Mud replaced frost. Spring returned to Warsaw not with hope, but with more soldiers, more patrols, more trains, leaving the city full of silent passengers who never returned. The rumors were no longer whispers. People knew. They did not say the word death, but it hung in the air like smoke no wind could clear. Saving children was no longer rescue. It was defiance against extinction. One morning, Daniel met a small girl with hair like gold and eyes that once surely sparkled. She held a tin cup as if it were treasure. When Daniel knelt to speak to her, she did not flinch. She simply stared, too tired to fear, too weak to wonder. He wrapped her in a scarf and lifted her gently, feeling ribs beneath his fingers like fragile branches. Carrying her through the alleys was like carrying a secret too precious for war to see. When he reached the exit, the girl touched his cheek with a tiny hand, barely warm. Her lips moved, whispering a single word, so faint it might have been a breath. "Thank you." He never forgot it. Some words leave marks deeper than wounds. But courage never walks alone. Danger follows. It came silently, without warning. One evening as he returned from a mission, he felt eyes on him. Turning the corner, he froze. A soldier stood ahead, rifle resting lazily at his side, gaze sharp, too sharp. The alley behind held another. Trap. Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs, his breath caught. The world shrunk to a single moment, one heartbeat wide. The soldier stepped forward, studying him. Daniel lowered his eyes, trying to appear small, harmless. He thought of running, but running was death. He thought of speaking, but words felt like traps. He thought of the children and something inside him stilled. Courage did not erase fear. It held it still long enough to breathe. A shout broke the silence. Another soldier calling from down the street. The guard turned his head, answering. In those 2 seconds, Daniel slipped through a narrow doorway, heart hammering so violently he thought it might betray him by sound alone. He pressed against the wall as boots approached, breath locked in his chest, vision blurring. The soldiers passed. For minutes or hours he stayed still, unable to move, unable to think, only feeling the pounding of life insisting it was not finished yet. That night he did not sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. How close danger leaned into his face. How thin survival was. A thread, a whisper. Yet by morning he rose again. He could not stop. Hope had chosen him and he would not betray it. He walked into the streets, into the cold air, into the war, because saving one child meant saving a world. Because his fear did not outweigh his purpose. The war raged on, but Daniel did not break. He grew into someone war could not erase. The ghetto wall stood tall, but they could not hold his courage. He saved children until the bitter end, until liberation finally cracked the sky open, until starving eyes saw daylight without wire and guns. He survived. Not untouched, not unchanged, but unbroken. And years later, when the world finally spoke of heroes, they mentioned soldiers, leaders, nations, but rarely boys with quiet eyes and shaking hands who carried hope like a fragile flame through the darkest night. But he existed. He walked among ruins and chose humanity. He saved futures he would never see. He lived without glory, without promise, without safety, and still chose light. And somewhere in a world rebuilt from ashes, the children he saved grew into parents, into teachers, into dreamers. Their laughter existed because he refused to surrender. Their children lived because he believed even a child could fight darkness. History remembers wars by battles and borders, but true victories are carried in hearts, not maps. Daniel's name was never carved into monuments, but in the unseen corners of time, in family photographs that might never have existed, in the echo of children's laughter that once nearly vanished from the world, his legacy lived. Quiet, powerful, eternal. Because sometimes the bravest souls are not the ones who hold weapons, but the ones who hold hope. And when someone asked him years later how he found courage as a boy in a world of death, he did not speak of fear, or danger, or sacrifice. He simply looked toward the sky and whispered the only truth he ever needed. Because someone had to, and I could not choose silence.